Processor or video card upgrade? A question that has plagued mankind for centuries. Probably. I was playing Minecraft during history class. But unlike my senior year, at the end of this demonstration, you will have actually learned something. We're going to show off several games running on a couple different computers and identify what would need an upgrade for better performance. And at the end, we'll even throw in a couple productivity examples. Diving right in with an easy example, we have inverses. First, take a look at the FPS. Generally, if you're shooting for 200 frames per second or beyond, you'll want the fastest CPU cores possible. We can see here that our video card is actually idle some of the time because the processor can't feed it enough instructions quickly enough. So for our CPU upgrade, do we need more cores or faster cores? If we take a look at total CPU usage, we're only using about 11%. The reason for that is that only one of the CPU's threads is actually being used, and it's being used at 100% capacity. So we need to increase the capacity of that one CPU core. The upgrade to make here would either be overclocking the CPU to make each core run faster, or we could get a different CPU entirely with faster cores. Next, we have Gas Guzzlers Extreme. Here we see that our graphics card is running at nears makes no difference, 100% capacity, and we have plenty of extra unused CPU cores, even though only one of them comes close to being used half the time. The upgrade we'd want to make here is the video card. Pulling up BeamNG Drive, we see that our video card is always being fed with plenty of work. Compared to the previous game, we can see that a couple of CPU cores are actually busy more than half the time, and a couple more cores beyond that look like they're actually doing something too. Still though, with a fully loaded video card and with each CPU core at least having some idle time, a video card upgrade is in order. Because I had actually started gathering data for this video a year ago, I have an older, slower processor and an example of games undergoing optimization over time. Claybook is one of these games. As of now, the graphics card would be the obvious upgrade, seeing that it's fully loaded. The few CPU cores actually doing work have a pretty decent load, so we wouldn't want to go too crazy with our GPU upgrade. Looking back to a less optimized version of the same game, and using a processor 2 generations older, we can see that the GPU usage is the one that's fluctuating. The upgrade back then would have been to get a faster processor. Here's another example of a video card limited game, with our 6-core processor having so many cores that some are just sitting there idle, and all the cores fast enough to be idle at least half the time. City Skylines can behave much differently than other games. Our video card here is clearly not being used to its full ability, because the CPU is too busy keeping track of the 250,000 residents to feed instructions to the video card. Many of our cores are under a measurably heavy load, and while having faster cores would speed things up, we're also starting to push the limits of what just 6 cores and 12 threads can handle. We can see that every single CPU core is well fed with something to do. But can it run Minecraft? Here we're running a texture pack several times the size of the game itself, plus shaders, plus mods. The video card is maxed out most of the time, but not all the time. We have plenty of extra CPU cores to spare. Notice how the processor load spikes when the video card load drops? These are stutters in the game, such as generating new terrain chunks, where the CPU only uses 1 or 2 cores to take on a big task, starving the graphics card of work being fed to it. This would be an example where I would consider both the processor and video card to be fairly well balanced. Most of the time, the graphics card is busy, and only on occasion do we experience CPU hiccups. If you want a smoother experience, upgrade the processor so that those occasional dips and stutters are much less jarring. For more frames per second at the sacrifice of consistency, for example, this wouldn't be too much of an issue if you had an adaptive refresh rate monitor, for example, then upgrade the video card. Some games with large worlds that vary in detail or density can have different parts of your PC holding you back depending on where in the game you are. In Rise of the Tomb Raider, most notably in caves or other areas where there's not an entire village to worry about in the view, the video card will be your limiting factor for getting more performance. But if we move to a different part of the game, then we can see that the CPU is what's holding us back. Like the last example, you'll probably want to upgrade both of them by 10% instead of one of them by 20%. One last thing to consider is a software limitation, where upgrading any physical part of the computer will give you nothing. Rocket League has a maximum FPS limit of 250 frames per second, so if your computer is capable of 300, you overspent on your parts. Firing up a quick game of Drop Shot, take a look at the FPS and GPU usage. For those brief milliseconds where the game would have run over 250 FPS, the video card starts to slack off a bit. If I were trying to play Rocket League professionally, I would want to upgrade so I never get less than 240 FPS on a 240Hz monitor, but because I am not a pro gamer, I am comfortable with this level of performance. Speaking of FPS limiters, when playing Dirt Rally on the Oculus Rift, we get a 90 FPS limit. The Rift has a 90Hz display, so that would make sense. But in other games like Concrete Jungle, 60 FPS is all you get. Do pay attention to the video card frequency in games too. Sometimes you'll see 75% GPU usage, but the video card is only running at something like 200 MHz instead of like 2000 MHz if it were under full load. Factorio is another fabulous example of an FPS limited game, because of how the game works internally. According to this Reddit thread, the best place for accurate information, even if you did run the game at 120 FPS, the animations and the game physics would still be 60 FPS and it would look exactly the same, except that your video card is making more fan noise in the background. So what have we learned today? First, download MSI Afterburner and examine your GPU load in each game. If it's not around 99% or higher, check to see that your FPS is not being limited, either by in-game settings or the game engine itself. And then you want to look at individual CPU cores and threads to see if the limit is that all the cores are loaded or that some of them are loaded. As a general rule for gaming, you're going to need faster cores more than you need more cores. I did promise a couple productivity examples though. If I denoise this long audio recording, only one core is being used, so having more cores would get me nothing. But if I were trying to get into 3D animation again, I would happily trade 10% slower cores, but to get 25% more of them any day, because the animation software will take as many cores as you could possibly throw at it. Hopefully you've learned enough from these examples to start understanding on your own how your computer works differently depending on the app or game that you run, so that you can identify your own system bottlenecks. System bottlenecks can also be the unfortunate result of not being subscribed to this channel. If you're still stuck in the great toilet paper shortage of 2020, then why don't you pick up a machine washable and reusable t-shirt? Or you can print off a 9-drive NAS chassis if you're bored and looking for something else to do in the next couple days. But until then, stay safe and may all of your PCs exist in 3 dimensions.